Yesterday, we celebrated Palm Sunday, the day where we remember when Jesus arrived in Jerusalem and people hailed him as their liberating king. They thought that he had come to set them free from their Roman oppressors. But what Palm Sunday reminds us is that Jesus is not always the king we want him to be. He's actually something far better. He's the king we need him to be. But this can be a hard lesson to accept. You see, these people, as they welcomed Jesus into Jerusalem, they were very clear on who they wanted him to be. They want him to free them from their Roman oppressors. But Jesus says that's not what he came to do. He did not come to set up an earthly kingdom, but an heavenly one. And so these people had an expectation that was not met. And that's a hard thing to deal with, isn't it? When we have expectations about what we think should happen, what we think is the right thing to happen, we have expectations that might be good and fair and something that's actually pretty important. But when these expectations don't get met, that becomes a tremendous challenge, especially when we think this is an expectation of what God should do. Like when we think God isn't meeting our expectations, when God isn't doing what is right, that's a really, really hard thing to deal with. And that's what ultimately led to Jesus' crucifixion, because he did not meet their expectations. And so the religious leaders who hated Jesus and wanted to get him out anyways, they used those unmet expectations to stir up the crowd and get the crowd that 5 days ago had been hailing Jesus as king. They turned the crowd to be able to say, crucify him. What changed between Sunday and Friday? It was that Jesus was not the king that they wanted him to be. He did not do the things they wanted him to do, and that's what turned the crowd against him. How often that can be what turns our hearts against God. God doesn't do what we want him to do, what we think is just so important for him to do. He doesn't do that. He doesn't come through in the ways we think he should, and how easily that can begin to turn our hearts against God. But Palm Sunday reminds us that though Jesus is not always the king that we want him to be, he is something better. He's the king that we need him to be. See, Jesus could have freed them very easily from their Roman oppressors. He could have done what they wanted him to do. But he knew something more. He knew that if he freed them from the Roman oppressors, that would not solve their greater problem, which was the oppression of sin that they were under. You see, he could liberate them from their earthly problems, but that would not solve their eternal dilemma of what are they going to do with their sin. And the fact that when they die, they were going to have to come before the judgment seat of God. And it's a fearful thing to come before the judgment seat of God as sinful people. And so Jesus did not come to solve their earthly problems. He came to solve something far more significant. He came to solve their eternal problems. He came to solve the issue they had of being sinful people who one day were going to come before a holy God. He came to give his life so that sins could be forgiven of anyone who puts their faith in him. Jesus took all our sins on the cross, and he died for our sins so that we do not have to face the punishment of death for those things. But when we die, we are then welcomed to heaven with God forever. Our sins are fully forgiven. Why? Because Jesus has already paid for all of them on the cross. He did not come to be the king who brought earthly liberation. He came to be the king who would deliver our souls to eternal communion with God forever in heaven. You see, we can be focused on the short term, but Jesus cares about our eternity. We can have what we think is right, but Jesus will do what he knows is best. And so, friends, when we're not getting what we want, when what we think should happen is not what is occurring, may Palm Sunday remind us that though we might not be getting what we want, God will always give us something better. He will give us what we need because he's proven that through Jesus, who came to meet our greatest need. And so as we come into Holy Week and begin to reflect on all that Jesus has done for us through his life, death, and resurrection, may all that Jesus has already done for us build our trust in who he is. And may that trust be what brings us peace when what we think should happen is not happening. May we trust Jesus, the one who bled for us, the one who died for us, the one who came to be a king, certainly, but a king whose brow was crowned with thorns, a king whose scepter were the iron spikes driving his hands into the cross, the king whose throne was on that hill in Calvary. Friends, it's at the cross that we see Jesus being not the king that we wanted, but the king that we absolutely needed. And so as we look back on the cross and remember how Palm Sunday was ultimately leading to Good Friday, as we look back on all that Jesus has been for us already through his life, death, and then what we celebrate on Easter, his resurrection, as we think about that, may we be reminded when we're living with these hard, unmet expectations, may we be reminded when we're not getting what we want, that Jesus, we can trust. He will always give us exactly what we most need.